Anybody there?
How are you?
Hey, good. Is this CJ?
Yes, sir, it is.
Hey, wonderful to get to talk to you and meet you over the internet. This is Jaime.
Hi, Jaime.
So I'm really excited to get to talk to you. Thank you for being my first Reddit guest.
Oh,
Just
wow.
to get that out of the way, I've been doing most of my networking on Facebook and Twitter. And I figured, hey, let's try this thing out. Let's see how it works. And I really appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to do it for sure. There's a
So
lot of good find on Reddits.
absolutely. So do you mind if we start at the beginning before we get to your debut work that has just come out? Is it all right if we go back to the origins of your creative journey, let's call it?
Absolutely. Sure thing. So it started when I was a kid, watching a lot of movies, growing up from a very young age. So some of my first memories in life was watching Wizard of Oz and
Mm.
Dancing with the Rain with my mom in the mid to late 90s. And I really found a love for movies, and that kind of transitioned into me being a very creative and imaginative person, especially because I was an only child. So I had to find a lot
Mhm.
of ways to entertain myself,
Mhm.
uh, which sounds sad, but it was the greatest days of my life, really. So it all started when I was a kid, just falling in love with movies and stories and storytelling, and
Mm.
that transitioned into me falling in love with, hey, let me take a stab at this myself. So
So do you remember, this might be, a bit nostalgic, but I tend to get a bit nostalgic anyway on this podcast. Do you recall what you were writing about when you were younger?
so when I was younger, it wasn't entirely writing too. It was anything from just acting out scenes in my backyard of movies I loved, or anything really, taking action figures and doing that whole,
Right, right.
plot line thing. Yeah. But when I was a kid, I think the earliest thing I remember was I was very young, and I remember writing a story about a man who went over to oh man, I'm trying to pull this from deep
From the
within.
depths.
From the depths, that's correct. It's a story, and I only remember this because my mom actually kept it.
Mm.
Typical mom thing to do, but she kept this, and I read it a few years ago, but it's the earliest story of mine that I can find. It was about a man who went over to someplace like Africa or something on a missionary trip, and all the children were laughing at him because he looked so different. Nobody's ever seen a man that looked like him from America, and he was confused on why they were laughing at him. And because he found out that it's because he looked different.
Mm.
And one of the little boys who was picking on him the most for looking different, later in the story sees a mirror for the first time, and he has a large scar across his face, and
Mm.
he realizes that he looks different.
Mm.
I wrote this when I was like 9.
You were
Um,
already concerned with the great divides in our cultures,
yeah.
it seems like.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but that's the earliest I can. And I know that you're kind of looking for like a general sense of what I was writing
Oh no,
about,
this is perfect.
but
Yeah, you're good.
okay, great, yeah. But honestly, I mean, it was a lot of acting out things I enjoyed, or just kind of, and also I start my I start my debut novel, which I know we're talking about in a second, but
Sure.
briefly, I talk briefly about, in the very beginning, I do a little author introduction, and I talk about how I was about 8 years old and I started writing my autobiography before I realized, like, wait a minute, I'm 8 years old. Nobody's gonna want to read this to care, and it's like, I'm only 8. So, I don't know what I was really into as a kid as far as writing, but it seemed to be all over the place.
But you had
It seemed to
output,
be
right? Like you
for
needed to
sure.
have that constantly
Oh,
going there.
definitely. Oh,
Yeah.
definitely, yeah. From a young, that's a constant theme throughout my entire life, even up to today. If I don't have some kind of something I can be creative in, I start to lose my mind a little.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely get that. So, did you do other kinds of creative work as you got older? Or maybe I'm not sure how old you are, so like after high
Yeah.
school or. things like
Yeah,
that?
I'm about to be 29, so pushing 30. Yeah,
Okay.
so when I was a teenager, YouTube became a massive thing. Well, I mean,
Mm,
it was a pretty big thing beforehand too, but it was becoming very culturally relevant.
mhm.
And yeah, I got into video editing and video creation, and that's something I still enjoy doing to this day as well. Not something I get to enjoy as much,
Mhm.
very time consuming,
Yeah,
but
yeah. For
but
sure.
but but video editing, I've never been good at like painting or drawing or anything, and video editing was my way of kind of taking a blank canvas and painting something out of it.
Yeah.
Very different, obviously, but very similar in a lot of ways too. So throughout my entire teens, I feel like my third arm was a video camera. I really loved doing that and editing and
Yeah,
creating that craft, and also music as well. I grew up
nice.
in a very musical household, and I took uh I took a lot of interest in the loudest and easiest instrument, which is the drums,
Mm,
at a very young age, because my dad has been a drummer since he was a little boy. So I grew up in that household, and music has always been an output for me as well.
yeah, has to pass on the torch. That's
Have
the
to,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Pass on the flaming drumstick, right? That's the
Right. So what
equivalent.
were your videos about? Like when you were doing YouTube
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, so, it was actually gaming videos. I was
Mm.
playing games and, quite a bit, just, teenager things to
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
and I was playing games, and, they were kinda popping off on YouTube, these videos were, and it was kind of this realization where it was like, "Well, if I'm gonna be playing this, I might as well just hit record," you know? I mean, I'm not
Right,
doing any
yeah.
more work, really. And then it kinda developed into something I really cared about,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
really spent a lot of time in. So I did, like, vlogs every once in a while, but also, gaming videos,
Mm.
for quite a while too.
Yeah, yeah. So video games, were a part of your life too? You felt like that was something that was very meaningful to you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I still actually own my original Nintendo 64, from when I
Nice.
was a little boy. Yeah. I yeah, that was a big part of my of me as a person, my identity.
That's awesome.
So and in some ways, I guess a creative output too.
For sure,
Kind
for
of,
sure.
yeah. So
Y
definitely.
yeah, one of the things that because I'm a little bit older than you by just a touch, I mean, you're talking like N64, and that's kinda my language.
Yeah.
That's kinda where I'm at, but I feel like it took me a long time to come around to the idea that video games were a really compelling narrative form.
Hmm.
And the fact that it was a more interactive thing, I think for me, because I'm just slightly older, it felt like it took me a little bit of time to come around. But I can imagine that being such a pivotal thing to be influenced by because of just how massive these things are now. Like the amount of control that you have. Do you feel
Sure.
like it's influenced your writing or maybe some cues that you've taken from the video game world?
I honestly don't know if it's directly influenced my writing, but it's influenced me as a person, which I
Mm.
guess in a roundabout way influences my writing.
Sure, sure.
um, yeah, even when obviously games today are miles and miles and miles and miles different than those N64 games, but
Yeah.
there were games that had deep meaning. Playing Zelda games, and you had to choose between very meaningful paths to go down. It just like there's 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 always been kind of a hint of deep storytelling,
Mhm.
that's been available to me, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess that's indirectly influenced me, but I wouldn't say that gaming directly one for one was like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
make me write. It more
Right.
so just kind of gets, because when I was a little kid and I loved movies so much, gaming is an interactive movie. I get to be the main character, so
Right,
I love
right.
that. So, um, I guess influenced me overall, but not my writing directly.
Yeah, for sure. So, speaking specifically about writing, when did you decide to take on this task, this mountain of a challenge to do a novel? And how did you go about it in the beginning? How did that start for you?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for acknowledging that it's an absolute mountain, because it is.
Yeah.
Um, and I think anyone who is a writer or has attempted to write something of length understands, like, wow,
Yeah.
this is a task. Um, to answer your question, I decided I was going to write one when I guess that night when I was 8 years old,
Mm,
right? But this direct novel, I wanted to. I knew I wanted to write a full length book. Um, it's something. It was a goal of mine for many, 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 many years.
mm,
Since I was a child, obviously we've talked about, but um, it honestly was a decision that I've always come up with ideas of stories, just very like simple, like couple word ideas, and I
mhm,
always write them down. And I was looking through this book one day of years of ideas, and I was like, man, there's so much here, and I have nothing to account for it outside of a couple of
mm,
lines of what it could be.
yeah.
And I kind of, I'm married, and life is getting a little fast for me as far as
I get you.
professionally, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
uh, and also we're wanting to start a family within the next year or two, hopefully. And I was kind of in the situation where it was like, man, I feel like if I don't write this now, I'm afraid I never will.
Yeah.
And realistically, my wife is very understanding and wonderful in every single way, and she would let me definitely write a book if we had a child and stuff like that. It's not like that
Right.
at all. It's just I know me as a person, and when I'm dedicated to something, I kind of go all in, and I know that especially for my first child, I'm gonna, that's gonna be my main focus.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
was I was it came out of kind of like fear and passion
Mhm.
in a lot of ways because I realized, like, I'm not getting younger,
Mm, mhm.
and I have all these stories, and I don't wanna be this guy who's 85 years old being like, "Man, I almost wrote a book." No, I wanna be the guy saying, "Yeah, I did write a book." So,
Yeah, yeah.
I wrote this, and it was almost in a sense of, like, if I don't do this now, I may never. And leading up to it, it was, part of that second question you asked.
Mhm,
Leading up to it, it was kinda like if I had one shot to tell a story of all of these ideas, this book full of ideas, what would I
mhm.
tell? And it took a long time. It took me, I mean, once I decided, like, okay, this is when exactly I'm going to write, this is how I'm going to write this, once I kind of got the analytics behind how I'm going to approach it,
Uh-huh.
I had to decide what I was going to write. And I had to look through these books and really think the books of my book of ideas I've gathered over the years. And
Mhm,
it took a long time. It took me like a month or 2 to be like, "This is the story I wanna tell."
mm.
And it's the book I made, In the Sight of
Yeah.
Sound.
I love how methodical all of this was. A lot of
Mm,
artists, a lot of creatives that I've talked to in the past, we kind of get to tend to just feel the muse, right? Sometimes, but
yeah,
there is that point where you have to get down to the discipline of it and getting it done. I love that
mm.
there was kind of a fire under your ass and you felt like, okay, this has to happen now. Or, I empathize with that because I felt like that before my child was born.
Mm,
Uh,
mm.
I think that there is a strange turning point at like late 20s where you're like, things are going to go off the rails or I'm going to get it together. And I think that you did the right thing because it's the kind of mindset that's going to, make you a better father, a better, partner or whatever. But
Sure.
I love that drive where you said like,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was gonna say thank you very much. Please
but
go
uh but
go
no,
ahead.
it's wonderful because I want to pick your brain about the mechanics of that
Mm,
because you said I'm going to do this and then it seems like you almost mapped it out like okay, I only got this
yeah.
much time, we got to get it rolling. So how do you, if we could get into the weeds a little bit with this,
Sure.
what did that look like for you before, like, once you decided what this novel was going to be, which idea it was going to be, how did you break it down to fit in with your life? Because I think it might benefit other folks who may want to
Yeah.
who may want to do something like this.
Absolutely. Well, I think the biggest thing was I kind of put things in a mental basket, kind of like what's something that I can temporarily put on hold and what's
Mhm.
something that I can't. So
Yeah.
the things that I can temporarily put on hold, if I'm watching a season of a show, I don't have to watch that. If I'm working 9 to 5, I have to go to that. So those obviously made their ways to two very clear and precise baskets of what can I put on hold and what do
Mhm.
I have to do?
Yeah.
And once I kind of figured out what I can put on hold, honestly, what I did was I the things that I could put on hold, these storyline, or these games I was playing, or
Right.
these
Yeah.
shows I was watching. I finished them very quickly, or books that I was reading at the time. I finished them. I was like, I don't want this lingering over my head. I want this to put, have a period on it. So
Hmm.
I blasted through the show I was watching. I finished the game I was in the middle of playing, and I kind of just finished everything that I didn't have to have, things I just found for entertainment.
Mm.
So it was less of a distraction. And then in replacement of that, I I got things prepared for when I finished as kind of like a reward. So at the time, some games came out that I was really looking forward to, that I was following the development of for many years, and I bought them and I didn't install them, and I was like,
Oh
okay,
man.
you get the cake once dinner's done. So I had that and a couple other things. And as far as so I did that as a kind of like I gave myself a potential reward at the end of it.
Hmm.
And then I also finished everything that I was in the middle of, so I could just didn't have it over my head, didn't get too far behind on those things. And then I put things on pause that I didn't have to have uh, in my way. The
Yeah.
second side of that is the things that I had to do,
Right.
in a relationship, had a puppy, a brand new puppy at the time,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
who was just really threw me for a loop. But yeah, I'm in a marriage. I'm in a full-time job that requires a lot of brain power. I
Yeah.
have my puppy. I have life that I can't just be like, I'm an artist.
Sure.
I'm like,
Sure.
I. Some people can. Some people can lock themselves in a room and be like, I'm an artist. But one part of me can't do that, and another big part of me doesn't want to do that. So I had to put two things in very clear baskets of what I can put on pause and what I don't, or what I can't. And then the things that I can't, I figured out, okay, what do they look like on a day to day,
Hmm.
and how can I lock myself in a room but also do those things.
Sure.
So I knew what I do to a day to day. I knew what holidays were coming up. I knew what birthdays were coming up. I had a clear, obviously I'm not a fortune teller, things are unpredicted all the time,
Hmm.
but I had a very clear understanding of my day to day. And with that, I kind of carved a way of like, okay, from this time to this time, I don't really ever do anything. Or from this time to this time, I'm usually playing that game I just finished or watching that show I just watched. So there's a
Hmm.
couple hours hypothetically. So I just kind of put things in two baskets and then figured out where I can replace the things that I don't need with the thing, with the time for writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was a very analytical, like, how do I do this? Because I knew that if I didn't have a very precise schedule, I think I would have slipped. And I felt
Hmm.
like time was running out, which sounds terrible, but it there was a part of me that was just literally like, I need to get this done as soon as possible because,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I said, if I don't, I may never. So it was really important to me to do that.
Yeah. And it does seem like there's an element of manufacturing the
Mm,
importance of it. Like you
mm,
just don't have enough time. And then that
yeah,
creates the sort of like the what do you call it? The pressure cooker to get this
yeah.
stuff out of the way. So from beginning to end of say, like your primary drafts, how long did that take when you actually had something in front of you that looked like a
Yeah.
novel?
Yeah, so, honestly, one of the biggest learning processes I've ever had as a creator and as a person is this process of writing a book, because I went in so arrogantly, like, "Okay, I'm gonna knock this out in a couple weeks."
Uh-huh.
I didn't. I did not. Because you get in there and you realize, "Oh, okay, this takes a lot longer than I thought."
Mm,
The first kind of so I will say this, my first draft is, very similar to what was released. There's only a few changes here and there, and obviously, grammar and, all that is
sure,
fixed, but,
sure.
um, the story itself is very similar, and I had a way of kind of going about that if you wanted me
Of
to go
course.
into
Yeah.
okay, so yeah, so basically I plotted out. One of the biggest things I was afraid of was writer's block. It's something I've never truly experienced, but I've never actually written anything long form as well. So
Mhm.
I was very afraid of it, especially because I kind of had a very strict timeline of what I wanted. So I literally plotted out every chapter. I wrote them down. Like in this chapter, this happens.
Mm,
In this chapter, this happens. I had the entire book timelined before I even wrote it. So it was a sense of almost like I know the bullet points. Let me write the in between.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it allowed me to stay on track, and it also allowed me to I never had writer's block a single night, and it was because of this timeline I had in place. So to answer your direct question, um, I had kind of the first version done. I'd say I finished it in 7 months,
Mm.
which is about 6 months longer than I planned. But it was really
Yeah,
something I wanted to get right.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so so it was about 7 months, and the entire process of day 1 of writing to release was about 2 years.
Well, that's not bad. That's about the typical lifespan or I guess
Sure,
origination span of a book of that size. But to get a
sure.
little bit more specific on the narrative of this, if you want to give us a brief, just sort of
Yeah.
recap of what In the Sight of Sound is, if you could give us a teaser on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, In the Sight of Sound is a story that takes place in modern day, but it starts 3 months after a black hole appears above the night sky, and it doesn't do anything, doesn't change anything. Everything goes on as normal, but obviously, it's not supposed to be there. So, world leaders kind of get together and form this kind of team of figuring out what the hell's about to happen, or what's going on. Which introduces us to the lead character, FBI agent James Maddox, who is preparing to go to Carnegie Hall to see world renowned blind composer Sergio Francis play his very last show. While James is in the audience, he realizes that Sergio is playing music that aligns with radio signals coming out of the black hole.
Mm.
And it's this race to kind of figure out where that connection is. So they bring Sergio back to DC and figure out what the next steps are to possibly literally save humanity from this black hole. So that's the main overarching plot.
No, I love it. I love, like I
Thank you.
said, those pressure cookers that are built
Yeah,
into
for
this
sure.
kind of story that just kind of get your adrenaline going, and
Yeah,
you have to wait till the last page to figure out what's going to happen. So,
absolutely.
so can you tell me about what it is specifically that drew you into this narrative, as just like somebody who said, I'm going to pick it out of this lineup of ideas that I
Yeah.
have. Specifically, what was it that made you go, this is the one that feels right?
Yeah, you know what it was? It was so I mentioned I spent about a month or two really getting in the mindset of what am I going to write, and really dissecting every kind of angle of every single story idea I had written in this book. And to be completely honest with you, it's not some profound answer. The answer is I got to the line of this kind of idea, which in my notes it's literally the one line is a blind composer a blind composer's music is coming radio signals from
Hmm.
a black hole. That was the
Yeah,
line. And I got to this and I was thinking like what does that look like? And I
yeah,
came up with
yeah.
kind of a rough first part of In the Sight of Sound. And the to be completely honest with you, the reason why I picked it is because it was about 15 story ideas down, and it's the first one that gave me cold chills.
Uh huh. Yeah.
And I'm a very, very hard critic on myself. I think I'll be harder on myself than anybody is ever capable of. And I've never given myself cold chills on a story. And it was kind of a inner feeling of like, all right, that means something.
Right.
How can this become a full story? So then I really kind of shifted my full focus on this one line and made the full-fledged story. And that's when I kind of made the timeline of what happens in each chapter. And then at the end of that, I was like, yep, this is the book.
Well, I love that too because I feel like we have a lot of creatives sometimes, and myself, that you have a line or a phrase that draws your attention and you feel emotionally attached to it. I think a lot of
Absolutely.
the stuff that I've done in the past has been very much, it's come from a personal place. But there's also another
Mm,
way that you're tackling creativity, which I'm also a fan of, and that's looking at pieces, right? You have
mhm.
the black hole, you have the composer, you have this or that, and it's less an emotional response and more of a, there's a problem to solve here. The narrative is a problem, and immediately your imagination starts soaring. And I think that's
Yeah.
what you can see in this is like the mystery of it is one that I'm
Mm.
sure you had to experience yourself as you were putting it together, because that was the enticing thing. But please don't let me put
Yeah.
words in your mouth, because I just think it's a brilliant way to put a story together, especially it's yeah, and if you could elaborate on the structure a little bit, I mean, I'd love that, because the premise is
Yeah.
so strong.
Yeah, no, you know what? I appreciate you not putting words in my mouth, but word for word, you got it, right? So that's literally part of it. It was a piecing puzzle pieces together of
Hmm.
figuring out what makes the story. And yeah, no, the structure of kind of that process was honestly, it was very in order.
Hmm.
I the first line, that one line that I saw in my story ideas, I kind of thought loosely like, okay, what would this look like? And just kind of sitting there really focusing for a little while and coming back and back to it and just kind of dabbling with the idea. I came up with the ending kind of before I even put anything on paper, which I'm very grateful for because
Uh-huh.
obviously endings are one of the hardest things to, in my opinion, to
Sure.
to really nail. So I had the ending before I even had the beginning, really. um, so because of that, I was able to correctly kind of plot every kind of puzzle piece directing towards the end because I had the end. I knew the
Uh-huh.
end. So
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
had the biggest puzzle piece I needed, everything else very easily fell in place. And I'm so grateful for that. But in the process of getting there was literally because the ending, because the finish line, I knew I was able to go chapter to chapter and figure out kind of a smaller puzzle piece, like what happens to get to the next chapter.
Right.
Which led me to, like I mentioned, very easily writing it down, not having kind of any roadblocks of what happens next. I had it all. Um, but it also allowed me to have a lot of fun with kind of putting Easter eggs in or also moving the story along really well. I've had the book's been out for I think like three weeks now,
Mhm.
and I've had people message me, and I've had multiple people message me, and they're like, "I read the first 100 pages in one setting, I couldn't put it down." And that as a creator, that's like
It's
that's
the
that's the
best. Yeah.
greatest compliment ever. Right, yeah, but also, there's a little bit of science behind that because that's kinda how it's written. It's
Mm,
written to where each chapter previously sets up the chapter after, and it is made to be a page turner and a
mhm.
very and honestly, it all kind of happened because I had that big puzzle piece at the end. I was able to make it like that.
Sure, sure.
And I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely, yeah. Now,
Great.
speaking of just sort of the legacy that you're kinda walking into here, I feel
Mm,
like we're all sort of riffing in many respects from what came before, right? I feel
mm,
that a lot of the time we have inspirations that maybe subconsciously or not consciously we're kind of channeling in some way. Did you feel after you finished your novel that you had inspiration, or you had some kind of I don't want to say like motifs or whatever, but did you have some inspirations that looking back on you're like, oh, this kind of fits into something like a noir thing that I used to like when I was younger, or this feels like a kind of story that would be from this time period, or this author, or things like that. Do you
sure.
feel like that?
Well, it almost is in many ways, my book's kind of a love letter to all those movies that I holds so dear to my heart, especially as a teenager. Movies such as, you know, Christopher Nolan's work
Yeah.
and things like Interstellar and Inception. Um, you know, there's pieces of, I think the biggest inspiration were movies that I've fallen in love with over the years, specifically kind of these mind-bending big
Yeah. Yeah.
endings. So not, I wasn't directly inspired that I knew of, but kind of like you said, after I was done, I was kind of like, wow, I see a lot of indirect inspiration from people that
Sure.
I really
Sure.
admire.
Yeah, like you feel that it might have an adjacent place. But when you
Sure.
mentioned that kind of, I don't want to say cerebral because it's kind of a tired phrase, that everybody uses, but just like it's sort of a mind trip a bit, and maybe I'm dating myself
Yeah.
by using references from like the 90s or whatever. But
No.
I think that's really exciting because you set out to, I guess, let me ask you this. How close is it to what you had in mind?
You know, honestly, it's exactly what I wanted.
Mm,
Which again, I'm very grateful for, especially because it's my first book.
yeah,
And you know, I've always kind of known where I sit as far as being a creator. Like I know that I'm capable. I've always known that I was capable of something larger than what I was making previously.
yeah.
And I don't mean that in an egotistical way whatsoever. Again, I am my hardest critic, and
Hmm. Yeah,
and I
yeah, for
always
sure.
will be the least talented in every room I walk into. That's just how I work.
But you also
But
got to have the
um,
confidence, right? You got to have that
yeah,
self belief, even not confidence, just self belief to have the output to finish it.
absolutely. Yeah, there
Yeah.
has to be something there. And but you know, honestly, the book is exactly as I wanted it to be.
Mm,
And I was not going to release it until it was. Which is dangerous because sometimes, especially from a creator, um there's sometimes where you can spend a lifetime changing the color of something when it was fine the first time.
sure, sure.
So it was this kind of like trick I had to play where it was like, it's never going to be perfect, but am I extremely happy? And the answer was yes. So it's exactly what I wanted.
Oh, that's great to hear. So now that
Yeah,
it's out into the world, if we could expand a little bit on that, how long did it take you to go from, okay, I have a manuscript that
I
feels
lost
right?
you.
Oh, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
I sure can now. Go
Oh,
ahead.
okay,
I sure
great.
can. Yeah.
So, just to expand a little bit on the post release of the book,
Yeah.
do you feel like, oh man, I kind of lost my train of thought. I had a really good one.
I'm so
So,
sorry.
oh no, you're fine. You're fine. I was just curious, what the reaction was, if we could expand a little bit on that and what you've learned about the work that you didn't know before.
That's a extremely great question. Um, so the reaction is, let me say this. So I self-published this book, and I don't have any kind of previous audience or anything like that. I'm not an influencer or
Mm,
anybody famous. You know, I don't have an audience just at my fingertips. So it was kind of a nerve-wracking thing because
mm,
it was this feeling of like, well, I'm self-publishing and my name doesn't have any kind of weight to it.
mm.
And the biggest thing was like, is anyone going to read this?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you know, honestly, the numbers didn't really, I wasn't too afraid of that, because everything else after, you know, once it was released, everything else is fun for me because the main goal I had was just writing a book. So
Mm,
that's done. Everything
yeah.
else is just the added benefit. So the reaction is, I'm very pleased with as far as the numbers go. I've sold way more than I ever expected to. And I'm not,
Mm,
you know, I'm far from a New York Times bestseller, but when you have a very, very low idea in your mind, and all of a sudden it's a weekend, it's 2 weeks in, it's 3 weeks in, and the
mhm.
numbers keep growing, it's exhilarating. I find myself checking the numbers like 10 times a day. It's just something I really love doing.
Yeah.
So the reception is great. But what I've learned is A few things. So the first thing is knowing your audience is a really big battle, because obviously I knew the genre of my book and I knew kind of in a general sense who reads that, but um I think I made a, I wouldn't say a misstep, but I think I assumed
Mm.
too much, because I released the book and I had a very small marketing budget, and I kind of was like, these people read these books, and then it was kind of like, well, yeah, they read them, but also so does this person and this person and this person. And it was kind of like I put all my eggs in one basket,
Oh, I
uh,
see.
and as far as like marketing goes, um, which worked, but I don't know why I did that. The second thing that I made a calculation on is I released it paperback only. My paperback, man, I love looking at the thing. It's absolutely beautiful. I had an extremely talented artist from Brazil make the cover, and it is
Oh,
just
great.
absolutely exactly how I wanted it to be. But
Mm.
I only offered paperback, and the first weekend I had like 10 people reach out on social media, people that I don't have any connection to, and they were like, "Where's the Kindle version?" And in my
Mm.
mind, I'm thinking, "Oh, I think paperback would sell more. I don't think Kindle.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't use Kindle, so my assumption is nobody uses Kindle," which is so stupid of me. So I think the miscalculation was kind of thinking that I needed to box off my audience when it came to marketing,
Mm.
which in some ways is beneficial, especially if it's like a young adult novel. If it's a young adult novel, you don't want to be marketing to 65 and up. Obviously, you want to be marketing to the young adult and the young parent mind mentality.
Mhm.
Mine's not a young adult, but I'm just saying that's an example. I
Yeah.
boxed it off with before realizing like, well, everybody's a reader. Like you don't need to. So I did that, and then the second miscalculation was assuming that everyone reads in the same format that I read in, which is so silly too.
But you have
So
to
if I
go
could
through
read,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's yeah, you have to go through that. Yeah, for sure. But outside of that, the reception in my mind is exactly what I hoped, what I dreamt of, but never thought was realistic.
Mm.
Again, very far from a New York Times bestseller, but in my mind, huge success.
Well, that's incredible to hear, and I wanna thank you for answering a little bit of the behind the scenes aspect of it
Oh,
and sort of
sure.
some of those things because I feel that a lot of us, whether we know some of this stuff intuitively or not, it's nice to hear from somebody who's gone through that process because
Absolutely.
I know that there's a lot of folks listening to this that who may be starting on that journey
Mm.
to publish, but you did Kindle or what is it, KDP, right?
Yeah, that's
Is that it?
correct.
Yeah. Okay. So that was pretty effortless for you. Are you pretty comfortable doing that sort of thing?
I am now, yeah, but yeah, leading up to it, I a lot of nights I had my head in my hands, just
Hmm.
stressed, like this is never going to come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's so much you have to learn. I mean, I've watched, I feel like, hours of YouTube videos on how to format a book or how to release with a certain marketing budget, or there's like a lot of things I didn't prepare for.
Yeah.
As when you're self-publishing, obviously you're responsible for 100% of it. So I'm comfortable now, and I'm so grateful that it's a service that is so easily available
Right.
to people, because there are so many answers questioned on, or questions answered online, that I needed, that I could not find myself. So
Yeah,
um Google was my best friend for a long time, for
that's
many
right.
weeks.
No, it's great to hear. So I only have a couple more questions to be mindful of your time, but
Great.
lastly, I kind of want to ask you what is on the horizon now that you've completed this work? Is
Mm.
there a long break in the works, or do you plan to continue? Is this a one-off, or will this be a series, or how is this
Sure.
going to play out?
Sure. So, it is a as far as In the Sight of Sound, it is a one-off.
Mm.
I tie the knot very clearly in the end, and I don't have any interest in a sequel. I think
Mhm.
I think when I was approaching the book, I knew that it was going to every answer was going to be question or I've gotten those mixed up twice now. Every question will be answered very clearly. So it's a one and done as far as that book. And honestly, as I mentioned, things are getting quick for me as far as life goes. And um, I wanted to get this one book out to say I released a book. And I was planning on literally making it my only book. Like
Mm,
literally being like, this is it. I did it.
wow.
Mark it off my to-do list. But now I'm looking at this and I'm like, why would I do that?
Uh-huh.
Because I I really love the process of writing, making these worlds come to life and these people come to life, and it was great fun. It was really great fun. It was a lot of hard work, but it was great fun. So
Mhm.
as far as In the Sight of Sound goes, definitely a one-off story. It's done, it finishes. When the last period's in the story, that's it. That's the story. You got it. But
Mm.
as far as me as a writer, I plan on this came out at the end of October. So for the rest of the year, I'm going to be kind of kindling that fire, and making sure that it's still doing podcasts and marketing and
Sure.
doing the things that it deserves. And then I think around January, I'm going to take a very light, nice mental turn off, and then in February or March, I plan on writing what's going to become my second novel,
Mm.
which is also a one off, but yeah. So that's the plan. So finish out the year strong within the Sight of Sound, and then kind of have a turn off of a mental, a
Yeah,
mental,
a
yeah,
well-deserved
just
break.
cut. Yes, and then get right back into it for my second novel.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I think you're well on your way, and it's going to be really exciting to see what comes down the road from you. Now,
Thank you so
lastly,
much.
I want to ask you, in terms of what would you say to somebody who's stuck, who
Mm,
really doesn't have the wherewithal to get the answers? Because we get a lot of answers on the internet. There's a lot of things that work for some people, but I'd like to know your thoughts. What would you say to somebody who's just at the bottom of that mountain looking to do the
mm.
hike?
I love that. A common question I constantly get is, "What would you say to new writers?" But this is a whole new take, and the second you asked it, I immediately knew the answer,
Mm,
and the answer for me is you have to ask yourself, how bad do you want it? And that was a very reoccurring mental thought I had. How bad do I want it? Nights when I worked all day long,
mm.
hard day, sitting at the computer. It wasn't writer's block, but it was like, "Oh my gosh, I wanna go to bed." How bad do you want it, CJ? Or it was like, "Oh my gosh, what am I gonna do with the formatting of this book? I have 0 idea how to do this. These videos don't make any sense. These tutorials don't make any sense. What, are you just gonna write a book and just let it sit in WordPad because you couldn't figure out formatting? How bad do you want it?" You gotta ask yourself, how bad do you want it? And then the second part of that is you have to want it. You can't half-ass it. If you're about to climb Mount Everest, you can't just be like, "Yeah, I guess the first base camp is good enough." No, you wanna make it to the summit. You wanna make it to the top. So you ask yourself, how bad do you want it? And also, do you actually want it? Because I'll let you know right now, if you kind of want it, you'll never make it to the top. You'll never make it to the top because there's so many things that will unexpectedly come your way that will knock you down. And if you don't want it with everything you got to stand back up and keep climbing the mountain, then you won't. So you got to make sure before climbing Mount Everest that you want to climb Mount Everest. And secondly, you gotta remember that through the coldest nights of all time, how bad do you want
It's a hell of a note to end on. I dig it.
it? Great.
CJ, thank you so much for
Absolutely.
reminding us to light that fire, to keep going
Mm.
for this work that is thrilling and is sort of getting our imagination going in the Sight of Sound. Where can we find it? Where can we find
Yeah.
you on the internet?
Well, well, first off, thank you so much for having me. This has definitely been a very, intellectual discussion, which
I
is,
try not to make it
not always
intellectual, but I think we go there all the time.
well An indirect intellectual
There you go.
discussion.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. Seriously, very unique questions that I was very inspired by. Just the discussion itself. So thank you first off. Secondly, you can find the book on Amazon, In the Sight of Sound by CJ Peterson, or if you don't want to search through the heaps and mounds of Amazon stuff, in the sight of sound.com, it will take you directly to the book. And also on inthesideofsound.com, you get a little preview of me reading the first chapter. If you wanted a little preview before you bought, that's available too.
Awesome.
And you can find me as well, inthesideofsound.com. That's what I'm going to say, because also my socials on there, the Goodreads link is on there, the Amazon link, the
Okay.
video for me reading. So inthesideofsound.com and is the answer to your question.
That's right. That's right. And we're going to put it in the episode description so folks can go track that down. Check it out, everybody. Thanks again, CJ. You're awesome. And I hope to keep up with you in the future.
Thank you so much, sir, for having me. I really appreciate you.
All right, man. You take care. Talk soon.
You too. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.